Issues in the News, brought to you by the Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians. I'm the president, Dorothy Dobie, and we bring these podcasts to you in hopes of shedding some light on how Parliament works, how it should work, how we'd like it to work, by speaking with people who actually were there. Recently, there was a big change in the way the Senate worked when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took over. And we've got a couple of guests today, former Senator Marjorie LeBreton and a current Senator, Donna Daskal, to tell us how it is working. There's a nonpartisan Senate, or is there? Donna, let's start with you, and you can tell us. You're a nonpartisan, so tell us what you think. And tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I'll start with my background. I spent 30 years in the polling business as a executive at Environics Research, and I had the wonderful opportunity to poll Canadians, to ask Canadians, to consult Canadians on just about every policy and issue that happened over 30 years. So it was really a privilege, and it was so interesting to be doing that as a career. And of course, I was involved in charitable organizations and causes, especially the cause of trying to get more women elected. So something that is I spent many years working on. One of the founders of Equal Voice, which today is an NGO that continues to press for more women to be elected. So I've always been around politics and public policy. And so anyway, that's my background. Dorothy, do you want me to go into, or do you want to ask Marjorie, Senator LeBreton, about her background?
Yes, we're very informal here, so I know, we'll dispense with the titles, Marjorie, because you and I've known each other for, 35 years.
At least.
At least. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, my background was, I was born and raised on a dairy farm in rural Ontario. So I have very strong work ethics. There was a quality of work on the farm, but I got involved in the political process very early on, right back to when Diefenbaker. So when I went to high school, graduated from high school, went to business college, graduated from there, and then started out as a secretary. And I started working for the Conservative Party in 1962. Was hired by Flora MacDonald when they were getting ready for the 62 election. Mr. Diefenbaker was the prime minister. And then I've worked in the party, worked my way up in the party through the years and in the political back rooms. I was in the government of Brian Mulroney. I was in charge of political appointments, and including the Senate, and was also as deputy chief of staff. But in my role in the party through the years, going back to something that Donna said, I was very involved in trying to get women involved, women to run. And I was looking at something when I was going through some boxes the other day, a speech I wrote back in the 80s. And honestly, you could, although there are more women, it still applies today. Why women or anyone at this point in time would want to get into politics is a bit of a mystery, but they do, which is good. And then also when I ran the appointments, when the Mulroney government took over, there was less than 5% of the Order and Council appointments that were women, other than in stereotypical roles, and we raised that up to a third. And so, I've worked, and then of course, I got appointed to the Senate in 1993. And then we had the huge defeat down to 2 seats. So I was kind of working in the Senate. We basically kept, on Parliament Hill, at least we kept the Progressive Conservative Party alive. And then of course the parties merged, and I was, when we won the election, I was named the government leader in the Senate, and I had that position for 7.5 years. And 3 of the years that I was government leader in the Senate, I was also Minister of State Seniors from 2007 to 2010. And I, on the seniors front, I after just having dealt with my husband who passed away a few months ago through the healthcare system the last 1.5 years, as a Minister of State Seniors, nothing prepared me for, so I'm now kind of focusing on seniors issues as well.
Well, yes, you've got a vast experience. And so what we're going to talk here a little bit about, because Donna, were you in the Senate before the change was made or after?
Well, I was appointed in 2018, so I've been there almost exactly 4 years now. So I was appointed by Prime Minister Trudeau, and that was, of course, before I got there, and before the government was elected. Of course, Mr. Trudeau removed his senators from caucus even before he was
I have a cat here that's going to walk into the scene. No, sorry.
Yeah. So he removed his senators from Liberal caucus after he became Liberal leader. And I guess that might have foreshadowed certainly what happened later, because he decided at that point, that early point, that he wanted senators to not be part of a political caucus. And gee, I know from talking to some of the senators who had been appointed, liberals, previous liberals who had been sitting in the Senate, it was quite a shock to all of them. It was one of those life experiences that none of them will ever forget. And they tell the story. So it seemed to be a very traumatic event, but it certainly foreshadowed what Mr. Trudeau did when he became Prime Minister, which was to go to promote and to appoint an independent Senate. So I just want to, again, I'm absolutely amazed at Senator LeBreton's experience also being in the Senate and being a cabinet minister. That must have been an extraordinary experience. But I can say that during my 30 years in the public opinion research business, I have observed that Senate reform has often been a topic that has been on our agenda, national agenda, in some way or another. And I think back to when I was polling, when we had the Meech Lake Accord. And the Meech Lake Accord actually had a provision in it to change the Senate. The Senate was supposed to be appointed from lists that the provinces would provide to the Prime Minister, and from those lists, choose senators from the particular province. So it was in the Meech Lake Accord, and we know the Meech Lake Accord failed. Then we had the Charlottetown Accord, and in the Charlottetown Accord, there was Senate reform again. The Charlottetown Accord had a triple E Senate. Do you remember we used to talk about the triple E Senate?
I was not a fan. Not sure.
And
I was co-chair of the,
in the thick of it. I remember you were in the thick of all of the activity around the Charlottetown Accord. And so you were right there. Maybe you can provide your observations. But in any case, so Senate reform was one of the long list, the long list of items that was in the Charlottetown Accord. And then, of course, that was defeated through referendum, which did not pass. So that was a second effort at Senate reform that failed. And then, of course, Mr. Harper had reforms that he was very, very interested in. And he wanted to have term limits for senators, and he also wanted there to be an electoral process whereby elections for senators would be held in provinces, and then the Prime Minister would appoint the winner. So he wanted that. That was opposed by a number of provinces. And then after Mr. Harper took that to the Supreme Court for an opinion, for a reference, the court said to him, the only way you can make these changes is if you change the Constitution. Well, Mr. Harper knew as well as any one of us today how difficult that is to do. And so he basically threw in the towel and said, I can't go there. So another Senate reform effort failed, another one. So of all the attempts to reform the Senate, this one has succeeded.
Yeah.
This initiative to create an independent Senate has succeeded, certainly so far.
Yeah, so I think, Marjorie, you would probably say that at least it has so far, as you said, Donna, because it's highly, what do you think is going to happen if the government changes? Because it isn't written in stone, it's just a convention right now.
Yeah, it's too early to say whether it's succeeded. And right now the Senate is made up of, I think it's 4 for specific groups plus an unaffiliated group. And I remember all of the things that Donna's listed, especially the Charlottetown Accord, because the Charlottetown Accord was defeated, it was really a great shame for the country, because a whole lot of other issues got in the way of the referendum on the Charlottetown Accord. People were mad about the GST. The Mulroney government was sort of at the end of its life in a lot of people's minds. And so the Charlottetown Accord was defeated, and it's really a great shame, because it would have really brought in a much more democratic, equal Senate. Having said that, and then of course I was involved with the changes Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper tried to bring in, and of course Donna's right, when the Supreme Court ruled, that ended that, and he just sort of washed his hands. I think one of the things that I am troubled by, and I remember, Donna, I remember the day that Prime Minister Trudeau basically told those long-standing, loyal Liberal senators who had great credibility in their own life other than a senator, that they were no longer Liberals. I mean, they were devastated. I remember talking to some of them and saying to them, I can't imagine how you must feel. I know how I'd feel if someone walked into me and unannounced and said, oh, by the way, you're out of here, you're no longer a Conservative senator. And so I think right now, we really don't know, because we will not know until there's a different, until there's a different government, whether this is actually going to work or not. And I know the argument about how the Senate has amended a lot of legislation. I'd use the argument that sometimes if the legislation has to be amended to that degree, it was poorly drafted to begin with. So, I really felt one of the things that got lost in the new Senate was the ability of senators to sit in a national caucus and listen to their elected colleagues and bringing forward it. This was very important. When senators sat in a national caucus, they understood, and it was more of a consensus thing. Now it seems to me that everyone's in their own little silo, and I don't know whether they really communicate. And at the end of the day, I think politicians and political parties are a good thing, not a bad thing. They're the backbone of democracy. We can argue right now, I think there's some real problems we're going through politically. But everybody, no matter whether they're an independent or they all have political thoughts. So it's not that you still come to the table with political biases. And so I think it's a way too soon to tell whether this has worked.
Donna, do you think it works?
Well, I think there's two separate issues in here. And this one is whether it works, and the second one is whether it's going to be continued. I think you have to separate those two. I think it works really well. That's my opinion from being there for 4 years, and also just from reading the academic research on the Senate. I think many people have said, this is a good development, and I think we are interested now, many of us, in democracies and our democratic institutions and how they operate and whether they're being challenged and threatened. And we see what's happening in other countries. And so I think about our country, and I think this is a positive development for democracy.
How many groups are there now, Donna? Name them, please.
Well, I mean, there's, I guess there are 3 independent groups, and then there is one partisan caucus, which is the Conservative caucus is there. And then there is government representatives. 3 senators form the government group.
So tell us how that works. 3 senators form the government group. What do they do?
Well, they facilitate the government's bills in the Senate. So they are charged with getting them through, and just like the position of government leader in the Senate, the previous iteration, government leader in the Senate brings the government's work to the Senate and tries to get it through. and works with the parties and groups in the Senate to organize a timetable and to get a schedule and to to facilitate it and make the deals and compromises and discussions that are necessary to get it through with all of the groups that are in the Senate. So instead of having just a government opposition, you've got a government opposition still there. That's the partisan Conservative caucus, and then you have the 3 other independent groups, and off you go. And you've only got a team of 3 to do it, but that's their job. Just like it might have been in the days before, getting the government's business through the Senate. That's their main role. We have a question period in the Senate. I'm always amazed at how it works because we have no cabinet ministers in the Senate, so almost every question is directed to the government representative in the Senate, and I don't know how he does it. Honestly, it's an incredible job. So that's what the Senate looks like. When we had our seminar in June, I mentioned the figure 60. I had, being a fact-based person here, I like to mention these things. 60, Prime Minister Trudeau has made 60 appointments, and they're all independent senators. All of the appointments that he's made sit as independents in the Senate and belong to one of the independent groups or unaffiliated. So that's a lot of senators, and that to me really is one real indication of the change. So we have only 16 senators, only 15 senators are in a partisan caucus today.
Well, we've just been joined by Senator McPhedran. Welcome to you, Mary Lou. Good to see you. We weren't sure you were coming, but we're very glad to have you with us. And what we just heard from Marjorie and from Donna about how the Senate works now, how it worked before. Donna was appointed as an independent, and Mary Lou, you were originally a Liberal, though, were you not? Back in the day?
No.
No?
No,
Okay,
no, no.
sorry, I thought you were back in the day where was a Liberal.
Nope.
Perhaps not.
Nope.
So you were never a partisan either?
No. I was in 2016, the first round of independent senators recommended by Prime Minister Trudeau were appointed. And then in November of 2016, another group, and both Kim Pate and I, and actually Patricia Bovey from Manitoba were all in that second group.
Okay, yes, I do remember that you and Pat were both appointed at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're just going to let Donna finish what she's saying, and then we'll turn to you and hear a little bit about your background too. Donna, do you want to continue?
Yes. Actually, I neglected to say earlier that I was born and raised in Manitoba too. So I just want to say.
Oh my gosh. So there's 3 of us against you, Mary.
I'm outnumbered.
You Manitobans have a way of doing that.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, I do love my hometown of Winnipeg, and
Good stuff.
as much as possible. Yeah, right. So I was talking about the groups in the Senate and the fact that the Prime Minister Trudeau has appointed 60 senators, all of whom sit as independent senators. And this has transformed the Senate. It's that simple. It's one of the things that has transformed the Senate is the appointment of independent senators added to the group in the Senate that Mr. Trudeau removed from the Liberal caucus before he became Prime Minister. And that's what creates the independent.
Is there still a liberal group in the Senate, or is
they're not? They are not part of the Liberal Party. They are not. Right. They don't sit in the caucus, as we know.
No.
They've joined by some senators who were appointed by Mr. Trudeau as independent. So there's a whole mixture of people there. And as I said, there are only 15 senators out of a total of 105, but now with 17 vacancies, only 15 senators are now sitting in a partisan caucus in the Senate, and those are the Conservatives in the Senate.
Okay.
So you can see how it's been transformed. It used to be opposition.
Yeah.
And
8 of those Conservatives, though, are now sitting as part of the Canadian Senators group, so I mean, and the same with the Liberals. They call themselves the Progressive Senators group. But the point I was making is that everyone, even though we all have political views, And I think at our June conference, someone made the point that a prime minister or an appointment process are still going to try and appoint people who are philosophically aligned with them or are going to support the government's agenda. I mean, that just, and
Does that mean I can never be appointed, Marjorie, when this government's in place?
yeah, but and the thing, and the
75
thing
not
is,
having to do with it?
yeah, but and the thing is that it basically, like when I listened to Donna, and she talked about the role of the government leader in the Senate, I was that person. I had to answer everything and I was in the cabinet, and it was a very difficult job because when people asked you questions, you had to compartmentalize, like something that you discussed at cabinet that still wasn't public, and so, but I managed to get through that. But the fact, I absolutely do support Senate reform, but it all wasn't broken. I mean, I think back to that wonderful healthcare study that Michael Kirby chaired, and I was the vice chair. When we formed government in 2006, we were vastly outnumbered. We only had 20 senators. We were operated in a minority position until the early 2009. So for 3 years, I was leader of the government of the Senate, and we had to do the very same thing that the government leader does now. We had to kind of work with the other side, work with some of our own people sometimes to get consensus to pass legislation. And so even though they kind of say now Senate reform, there was a lot that went on in the Senate. And of course, people judge the Senate by some of the scandals. And of course, one of the things that I tried to do was kind of rein in the spending and also have more accountability and transparency when we started to release senators' expenses, then subsequently made the news, and ultimately I think was one of the driving points behind the Prime Minister deciding to kind of wipe the slate clean and start over. But I think now to say now that this is the proper model and what was there before was not, is really not fair to the people who sat in the Senate before, and it's still too early to judge whether this model over time will actually serve the government and the Senate and the people in the way that's anticipated now, because the jury's out as far as I'm concerned.
So you're the only one, Marjorie, who has actually served as a member of a caucus in the Senate with the others. And so that I think that puts a different spin on things, because I think I probably have to agree that being there and understanding the policy agenda is helpful to senators. But on the other hand, Mary Lou, perhaps you could tell us what you think about the current system. What are the advantages from your perspective? And you've been a long time observer of politics, whether or not you're partisan.
Thanks, Dorothy, and thanks for the invitation to join the panel today. I am not quite as sure as I think Donna is that there has been a transformation. I think that the way in which the groups are learning to influence their members is very much affected by the context within the Senate that hasn't changed. And I'd be very interested in some of Marjorie's observations on this as well, that the Senate is truly unique in Canada. I mean, it is completely self-governing. And the transparency and accountability that Marjorie was referring to, I think there's still lots of room for more of that. And I think that the institution itself, if you will, the architecture has actually not changed that much. So I certainly agree with Donna that having only 15 declared partisan caucus members is a dramatic difference. But as you pointed out, Marjorie, this is not the first time that there's been that kind of tightly disciplined group that's had to deal with a big agenda. And I think it's also worth acknowledging that the Conservative caucus has held on to its official opposition title. and that it has so far very successfully held on to a budget as official opposition that if it was measured by numbers of people, there would be far less in that particular pot. So from my point of view, I think, and I also should just clarify that I don't belong to any of the groups. I'm unaffiliated and truly, some would argue, truly isolated as an unaffiliated senator. And I think that though that as time goes on, if the desire to actually increase greater accountability and greater transparency, then there will have to be changes to some of the architecture of the place.
So what sort of things were you thinking about, Mary Lou, when you talk about the architecture of the place? How do you feel that
Well,
that should change?
Well, I was actually reading about the Star Chamber the other day and how it came to be created, and the fact that it was initially created to deal with people of privilege, and that it was people of privilege judging people of privilege, and that it was could be and usually was conducted entirely in secret, that when decisions and discipline decisions were made, they did not have to give reasons, that the authority of the quite small number of senators and quite small number of members of the Star Chamber was absolute, that they could decide, except for expulsion, but they could decide on a whole range of very, very serious punishments that would be delivered to senators by senators. And I think the recent court decisions that have been responding to the appeals that were brought by into the main court system about Senate decisions, these were brought by former, now retired Senator Mike Duffy. So far, he's lost every one of those. And the judges have said very clearly, you were inside that bubble. Whatever other senators decided to do to you, other senators can decide to do to you. We don't touch it. So I think that the Senate's full of very bright, very capable, very dedicated people. And if you have people that bright, they all know in their back of their minds what kind of vulnerability there is to this set of procedures and just disciplinary processes that I would argue are in many ways quite similar to the Star Chamber.
What do you think about that, Donna?
Well, I am not exactly sure how to address that, but I do want to just mention a couple of things. We were talking about whether we have changed or how much we have changed, how this Senate is different. And I just want to get back to that point for a minute and touch on something that Marjorie said. And a couple of points. And I hope this will illustrate the fact that we are different than the previous Senate. Marjorie alluded to this. So in the Parliament from 2015, the 42nd Parliament from 2015 to 2019, 33 out of 88 government bills were amended in the Senate. 33 out of 88. That compares to one bill that was amended by the Senate in the previous government, Mr. Harper's final government from 2011 to 2015. So to me, even that one number right there just tells you how different this Senate is from the previous Senate. One amendment, 33 amendments. It's kind of like night and day. That most certainly tells us that the Senate is a very different, it operates differently than it used to. And let me just give you one other number. That number is 49%. 49% of the Senate are women. And that is another indication of how different we are from before. Now, that being said, we know that the Senate was always somewhat better than the House of Commons in representing women. But still, when we are virtually at half the Senate, that tells you that this is a different Senate than it used to be. So if you add together the independents, and then you add together the amendments, the kind of work, the sober second thought, and if you add together diversity, not just more women, but more visible minorities, more Indigenous senators, more senators from the Black community, we've got a different looking Senate from before. Those to me are big changes. Now, and as we were saying earlier, I think they work. I think the Senate works. I mean, politics is always a messy business. Like, let's just start by saying it's always messy. But within the mess that is normal, this I think is working very, very well. And as we said earlier, the question of whether it's going to be continued by a future government, that is an entirely separate kind of issue. And that really depends on who does get elected and what their views are and whether they think this is a good thing or not. I might add here that 3/4 of Canadians in a public opinion research do want the changes to be continued. So if that's worth anything, I hope it is, then maybe that will, that's something that I think it's important to say.
Marjorie, the question of the 33 out of 88 bills being changed and one in the previous, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, and I said this at our earlier meeting when I heard that number, that indicates to me there was a lot of legislation very poorly drafted and actually to require that number of amendments. And but I also like from a political perspective, if I were the government and I was drafting legislation, I would leave some wiggle room for amendments down the road, maybe something that the government didn't really want to initially put in the bill, but they were hoping it would be amended. So, I'm always, I don't want it but there's probably a lot of behind the scenes negotiations too, as for some of these amendments. And in terms of, I absolutely think it's wonderful that half the Senate are women. But, again, this evolved over time. I mean, under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, there were very few women. John Diefenbaker named the first Aboriginal senator ever back with James Gladstone. And Mulroney definitely improved the number of women in the Senate over Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Chrétien continued the process, and under Stephen Harper, there was women and also many visible minorities appointed to the Senate. So it evolved over time. So I agree with Mary Lou because I think kind of the overarching structure of the Senate really has to be looked at, the whole governance, because I remember the whole debate. I was no longer government leader over the whole debate over Senator Duffy. But I remember going into the archives of the Senate and the rules, and the Senate they actually did have absolute say. And so now whether that should be the case or whether it should be modified a bit, but it did give the Senate complete control. And when you go really back in history, the Senate was initially to protect people from the type of people that got elected to the House of Commons. So thank goodness that's evolved. But again, so this new structure with the four distinct parties, and I know like I'm kind of watching it politically right now, because some of the senators that I'm more closely aligned to are kind of went off and they're now part of the Canadian senators group. And some of them I'm not as closely philosophically aligned to are kind of still with the Conservatives. So, I mean, that's going to be sorted out over time politically, God knows when, but it will be. And, but I do believe in the Westminster system, there has to be a government and an official opposition. Now, I grant you, Donna, they're down to 15. And maybe that'll change. Maybe down through the years, they're going to have to actually declare the group that has the largest number, the official opposition. But in a true Westminster system, in order to have an accountable parliament and an accountable government, you have to have a government and you have to have an opposition. And again, I still think most, and I look very carefully at all of the senators that have been appointed. Most people, many are truly independent, but most people have some connection or because no government's going to appoint senators if they think that they're going to cause a major roadblock to getting their legislation through. So I mean, that's just human nature. That's the way it is, as far as I'm concerned.
I think you're right about human nature. Mary Lou, you're sitting on your own. You're not as aligned, as you say, with any particular group. How do you think it works when it comes to voting? Do you think you have an influence? Do you think you have a real say as a complete independent in the structure right now?
It's really difficult for me to answer that, but I would venture to say that any influence that I may have is not really a function of whether or not I belong to a group. I think it has much more to do with the reasoning that's put forward. One of the things that I really enjoy about the Senate, the number of speakers that have really carefully researched what they're saying and very different points of view. Well structured, well researched, very different points of view. So I can speak for myself and say that my vote is very much influenced not by the group's membership, but by what the senators are actually saying. And also and I speak only for myself here, I'm also influenced by what I know those senators are doing. I know I'm an activist senator, I'm a feminist activist senator, and yes, that does influence when that kind of analysis, those kinds of concerns, social justice concerns are woven in. Someone observed to me the other day that they found it very surprising how strongly I was aligned with a number of conservative senators. But of course, I said to them, well, those are on issues of human rights. And I share the grave concerns about China and the Uyghurs. I share the concerns about the Rohingya. I share the concerns about what's happening with Taiwan, what's already happened with Hong Kong. And I think we see more of that. I mean, I think this supports some of the points that Donna's been making. We see clustering around positions, around issues, and therefore inevitably around bills. And I also really find it interesting to see how often we don't have a predictable voting pattern. That often when it's a standing vote, you can see that people are sort of like, where's this going to go? Because no one's quite sure. And people, I think, are definitely voting with their minds on many, many of these bills.
Marjorie, I've watched the Senate debates a couple of times. And do you think that are people in the Conservative caucus influenced by by the speeches? Has this changed a lot in that way?
I would say most of them would. Some of them I don't think are influenced by anything other than their own particular view. But I agree. Like, I mean, I think, excuse me, in the Senate, first of all, I've listened. Some of the speeches are really, you're quite right. I mean, they're well thought out. They're well researched. It was always known that groups that appeared before Senate committees and Senate committees worked absolutely across the aisle. And that was really where you saw a lot of great work done. But any major group that appeared before a Senate committee, whether it was in it was in health or social policy or economic policy, they always said they had to be much more prepared when they appeared before a Senate committee than they were over in the House of Commons, where it was more over in the House of Commons, more kind of scoring political points, where in the Senate, they actually did ask some questions that really affected the policies that they were discussing. So I actually, I think, I know I did. I mean, I know on many issues when I was sitting in the opposition in the Senate, I followed my own views on social issues, especially marriage equality and, of course, choice. So I think most of the senators, especially the conservative appointed senators who are now sitting in the Canadian senator group, I think people like Dennis Patterson, I think they really do have a very big social conscience. And so I align myself more with them than I do perhaps with some of the ones that I know have more rigid
Well,
positions.
did you
But that's
enjoy having,
what the political party's all about.
did you enjoy having that opportunity when you were there after the Senate changed, Marjorie, before you retired?
No, I know I'd retired. I
You
retired in,
before. Okay.
yeah, I was there in January 14 when the whole thing changed. So so there were a few appointments, but I actually retired shortly thereafter. And
that-
so I didn't really get, we were
No.
still very much in liberal, conservative, and a couple of independents.
That to me is interesting because I think, I mean, I heard this debate at the annual meeting, and I thought it was very interesting to see that there were two points of view with regard to how this works. So there's Donna's point of view where this works very well and things sort themselves up and everybody's independent and does their own thing, except they're not, Donna, are they? Because they belong to groups. Which group do you belong to and what's your alignment and how do you think that works?
Well, I belong to the Independent Senators Group, which is the largest group in the Senate. We have 49 members. And actually, what was and on this very point, what was so interesting at the June seminar was that various former parliamentarians would say something along these lines. We always worked across the floor and we had such collegiality and so on. And it was almost a sense that they didn't think we had that. It's kind of like they think we're just wandering around, sort of out there by ourselves in the hallways. And that's certainly the sense I got from the group there in June, Dorothy.
Yeah.
But that's not true because, of course, we work. We work across group lines. We work within our groups. We strategize and and work together and all of those sorts of things on committees. We work across party lines and so on. So we have that. We have the collegiality for sure. And I just wanted to make that point because after I left that June seminar, I thought, how interesting. They've got this idea of us as we're just, sort of satellites.
Jim Munson had that point of view.
Did he?
Yeah. Actually,
Yes.
I thought it was 39 members of your group, but not 49, Donna.
Oh, am I wrong about that? 30?
You said 49. I think it's 39.
Oh, okay. Sorry. If I may have made a mistake. Terribly sorry.
There's
keeping
49
score.
women, 39 and then
Yes. Okay, I'm getting my numbers all mixed up. That's bad. But in any case, that was one thing I just wanted to say. So how do the groups work? Well, we don't take positions on issues or legislation, but typically we will work together on process issues and timing and trying to figure out what's going on and when things are going to happen and all of that and what the government's plans are and what they want to do and what the other groups want to do. And so really it's a matter of that's where we come together typically is on process, pretty much on process issues. We don't take positions on issues together as a group, or we don't take positions on legislation.
So you vote independently. The people in your group might vote differently.
Yes, and as Mary Lou said, we will, sometimes we don't know exactly how the votes are going to play out on particular bills, and we don't know how everyone in our group is going to vote. We certainly don't. And then,
So
there
have
it
you ever
is.
has the Senate ever defeated a bill since the new system came in?
We came close. We came very close. I can't. I can't think of any where we did, Mary Lou. I don't know if you can think of any, but we came very close. We came within 4 votes of defeating a government bill, C-48, the tanker banning oil tankers off the West Coast. That came
Yeah.
within 4 votes of being defeated. I was on the transport committee, and that was such an exciting bill to work on. It was just insane.
But doesn't that kind of prove Marjorie's point that really senators do have biases? Or do you think that they are really just trying to shore up what they feel is the proper role of the government? I think there's two possibilities there. What do you think?
I think there might be a third possibility in using the very compelling example that Donna's given us on C-48. Even the really seasoned senators who'd been there much longer than many of us at that time were really surprised. I mean, I just think it was a bit of a wake-up call for the leaders of the groups. And yes, they state that every senator can vote independently, but I was a member of the same group as Donna in that period of time. And I feel that I noticed an increase in the inquiry prior to a vote, with prefaced by the statement of course, we're not telling you how to vote, but we'd certainly welcome knowing how you plan to vote if you feel you can share that. Because I think people were really shocked at how close we came to defeating that bill.
But Marjorie, you were in this, well, you're not in the Senate, you were in government, or at least
Yeah.
we were in government.
Yeah, well, I was in the Senate in the opposition for a long time, and then in government for was in the
But
cabinet.
when there was a bill defeated, a very important bill to women in the Senate back in the Mulroney days. And that was when there was a partisan Senate. So does that not also prove the point that
That was a very interesting. I was actually still in the Prime Minister's office.
Yes.
And it was about the vote on abortion, and it was Bill C-43, and the vote was actually 43-43, and a tie vote is a loss. It was one of those coincidences of numbers, and absolutely. And when I was government leader, there was lots of times when I had many senators that didn't support what the government was doing, and but we had, and so there was. They voted the way they wanted to vote. We usually had a pretty good idea who was going to support us, like Mary Lou says, before we'd actually put it to a vote. And but again, I know what Don is saying, that the one system versus the other. There's good things in both systems. What I'm saying is there was a lot of good. There was a lot of good and a lot of cross. I mean, I used to. With the leader of the opposition, James Cowan. I mean, I spent hours, working with him as we collaborated to get legislation through. And lots of times, he would make suggestions and we'd adjust in order to accommodate, or maybe give more time for speakers so they could get. So, I guess, and I know why Jim Munson said what he did, Donna, because he had this feeling that all of us who worked all these years, and Munson and I are great friends, although we were obviously on the other side. But I mean, only during question period and only during very, rankers, things like the Senate expense thing, where we really kind of got at loggerheads. But most of the time, and especially in committee, we worked collaboratively, and the government, and most of my time in politics has been under Liberal governments, and I was in the Senate from 93 to 2006, and I supported a lot of things that the government brought in.
Yes.
And so,
actually, you know what? There was a brilliant example. Mary Lou may remember this. It was the corrections bill we had. And if the Conservatives in the Senate saved the government's bacon on that, and they voted for the bill, when actually, if they had voted against, it would have been defeated. So, that was a very dramatic
moment. It was a couple of
times. I will never forget it. The Conservatives stood up en masse to support a government bill that, had they not done that, would have been defeated. And so you see.
And I supported lots of
things can happen. And also, by the way, I do apologize. It is 39. I did get that wrong. So you're absolutely correct.
I kind of embarrassed.
No,
You
no,
hear
and
the
I'm on to the 49, the 49% women. Got myself
So
ready.
I guess there's no easy answer, and maybe that's one of the reasons the Senate was never reformed. But this is from a non-Senate person, but my observation is that people of very good faith have been appointed over the years to the Senate, with the odd bad apple that that happens with human life. But that there are very smart people. They do have a sense of sober second thought and responsibility to the country, that it transcends politics, even if they're politicians.
Yeah.
Do you agree, or would you disagree with that?
I agree. I totally agree. And as I always point out to people, when they always used to think that, the senators are members of parliament, this idea of members of the parliament and senators are members of parliament. There are two houses of parliament, the House of Commons and the Senate. So no, I mean, there's always bad apples, and they ruin it for the rest of us. But, when I called in the Auditor General, which really made me popular, by the way, on both sides of the chamber. But people forget that like 86 senators were absolutely given a clean bill of health by the Auditor General.
Yes.
But that didn't make the headlines. It was the ones who'd kind of abused the expenses that did. But, that's human nature.
Can I ask Marjorie a question? Marjorie, is your party going to continue to support an elected Senate, do you think? What are your thinking on that?
Honestly,
Depends on who wins.
after having just come back from center-right conservatives trying to move people into the moderate mainstream middle, I guess it depends on who's the leader and where the party goes forward from here. But I think, generally speaking, most people in the Conservative Party support some kind of Senate reform.
Okay, well, everybody always
direction.
supports reform everywhere. What can we say about that?
Yeah.
Mary Lou,
I don't think I doubt very much. They may, like, I'm just speaking, like just from my own instincts here. Once a process has been changed, I don't think you'll see a wholesale flip back to something else. I think there'll be some moderation between what's there and what was there if we were to form a government.
Mary Lou, we've just got a couple of minutes left. Mary Lou, did you have a comment to make? You're muted, Mary Lou. There you go.
I would love to share just a very brief anecdote about that loss that both Dorothy and Marjorie referred to. It was, for me, a high point in my life as an advocate on sexual and reproductive rights, because I was in the room with senators, women senators, from crossing all the lines. Those women worked as women. They worked as feminists. They worked as pro-choice women, and I was in awe. Oh my Lord, the phone calls they were making. I mean, I was a lawyer specializing in this area, and they had me there as a resource person. I'd come to lobby them, and they dragged me right into the office while all of them were meeting and strategizing. And I mean, it was wonderfully entrusting. And I just have to give this one anecdote. So they knew they were potentially going to lose this vote by 1 or 2 if they didn't swing a couple of male senators. And I actually heard this discussion. They were like, well, we'll call him and we'll call him. Well, that one, he's away with his mistress right now, and I'm going to call him and I'm going to tell him if he doesn't vote for this. And I was just sitting there with my eyes like saucers. So that's the kind of women coming together that brought about that result.
Yeah, and one of the women was another Manitoban, Janice Johnson.
That's right. I remember
two of them, because Mira Spivak and Janice
Spivak,
Johnson
yes.
were both in that room.
Spivak, Janice Johnson, Pat Carney. Yeah.
That's right. That's
and
right.
Thank goodness Brian Mulroney had the courage to say, okay, you will.
Yeah.
Yes, Pat Carney wrote a great piece about that in the Globe a couple of months ago. That was really a terrific read.
What was that, Donna?
Oh, Pat Carney wrote a piece about it in the Globe
Yeah.
a couple of months ago. It was really good.
Yeah.
Well, a little bit of history. And I will say that I think it's really important that there be men and women in equal value and equal numbers whenever it's convenient, because there are always two wonderful sides of the story. We both bring different perspectives. And I think that you women have probably made a lot of change in the Senate without even, referring to the fact that your gender is an issue, because I think you're very strong and independent and smart women. Thank you so much for everything you do. And for continuing in the Senate, Mary Lou and Donna, good work. And Marjorie, what can we say? You sort of led the way for a long, long time, and we really appreciate all your leadership and support.
Pretty lonely sometimes. It's nice to see lots more now. But we still have a long way to go.
Well, thank you all very much. It's been very informative. I'm looking forward to another opportunity to discuss some of these issues and have you on again. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support and your help on this broadcast, folks.
Oh, thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you. Thanks,
Yes,
Dorothy.
it was a pleasure.
Thanks
All
for
right.
inviting me,
See you,
and
Meredith.
thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Take
Thank you,
care. Bye.
everybody. All right.